Twins. An evolutionary loophole that gives you an edge before you even take your first breath. Scientists looked at twins who grew up in entirely different worlds, different cities, different families, yet they ended up with the same careers, the same fears, and the same sense of humor. One pair both became firefighters. Another both chose the exact same name for their dogs without ever speaking. This isn't just luck, it's the raw power of biology dictating your path more than your environment ever could. For most of human history, to be alone was to be a target. Predators looked for the stragglers, but twins were born with a permanent guardian. You were never the weakest link because you were never just one. Nearly 40% of twins develop a secret language as toddlers. It fades, but the neurological wiring stays. You score significantly higher on empathy because you spent your formative years studying one person at point-blank range. You mastered the art of conflict, disagreement, and recovery before you ever stepped into the real world. You walk into rooms with a confidence others can't explain because, deep down, you've never been truly alone. But the bill comes due in your 20s. Who are you when someone else shares your face? Twins who avoid that question stay stuck, but the ones who face it develop a rare, unshakable sense of self. You were born with a level of trust that most people spend an entire lifetime trying to build. Firstborns, the natural-born leaders of evolution. You were the test run, and it was a massive success. Out of the first 29 astronauts NASA launched into space, 23 were either firstborns or only children. That isn't a coincidence, it's a pattern. The blueprint was drafted 50,000 years ago in East Africa. While parents were occupied with the hunt, the oldest child was drafted as the camp's guardian. No one trained you for it, you were simply the first one there, handed the weight of responsibility before you even had a choice. This cycle repeated for thousands of generations, across every culture on Earth. A massive study of 241,000 men reveals the tangible result of this history. Firstborns consistently score about 3 IQ points higher than their younger siblings. It isn't biology, it's an investment. Between the ages of 2 and 4, you received 3,000 more hours of undivided parental attention than anyone who came after you. You had more words, more focus, and more questions answered before you ever had to share the room. When a sibling finally arrived, your role shifted from student to teacher. Explaining the why of the world to a 5-year-old forces a level of cognitive clarity you can't fake. That sharpened your mind without you even realizing it was training. It's why over half of all US presidents and the vast majority of Fortune 500 CEOs are firstborns. Leadership wasn't a choice you made, it was a role cast upon you before you could even read. But that early start carries a heavy price. You learned how to perform long before you learned how to rest. Even now, asking for help can feel like an admission of failure. That pressure built your greatest strengths, but it also built a weight you've been carrying since before you knew what heavy really meant. Would you like me to adapt the section on the solitary power of the only child next? Only children, the power of maximum investment. The stereotype says you are spoiled, selfish, and unable to share. But 7 decades of data prove that narrative is entirely false. Only children don't just keep pace, they often match or even outperform firstborns on standardized tests. They develop more sophisticated vocabularies earlier and score higher on ambition than any other birth order group. When a family's entire pool of resources is funneled into a single person, it creates a psychological foundation that yields results for decades. Historically, this was simple survival math. By focusing on one child, parents could transfer more knowledge, pass down more specialized skills, and maintain a tighter watch over every potential threat. This maximum investment strategy was the most potent evolutionary advantage a parent could provide. As an only child, you also developed a relationship with solitude that others find intimidating. For you, being alone isn't lonely, it's restorative. This ability to self-regulate links directly to high-level careers requiring intense, sustained focus, writing, deep research, or building complex projects over years without the need for an audience. However, there is a hidden cost to being a parent's one shot. They poured in all their resources, but they also poured in all their fear. While this creates an incredible drive, it also leaves you with an internal critic that never stops talking and a standard of perfection you can never quite touch. You also missed the early combat training of sibling rivalry. While others learned to negotiate through daily household friction, you had to learn those social mechanics later, and often more uncomfortably through friendships. The developmental gap eventually closes, but the solitary, high-stakes nature of your path remains a permanent part of who you are. Middle children, the evolution of the stealth leader. Middle children are often called the dangerous ones. Think of Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, or Martin Luther King Jr., all middle children who were likely overlooked at some point in their lives. But being ignored wasn't a disadvantage, it was elite training. In ancient human tribes of 20 to 30 people, survival depended on someone preventing the group from fracturing. This wasn't the job of the strongest warrior or the loudest leader, it was the role of the one who could bridge both sides because they were never handed a single, fixed perspective. Researchers in group survival call this the coalition keeper. Every stable community required one, because without a mediator to heal internal rifts, groups split, and in the wild, a split group was a dead group. That was your evolutionary purpose. A meta-analysis of 200 birth order studies confirms the result. Middle children are significantly more loyal in their relationships than their siblings. Because family attention was often spread thin, you learned to look outward, building expansive social networks and bonds that didn't rely on a shared last name. You are what researchers call a stealth leader. You don't walk in and demand to take over a room. Instead, you influence and shape it from the inside. However, this ability comes with a shadow, identity. When you are neither the trailblazing first nor the protected last, defining who you actually are requires immense effort. You can become so adept at empathizing with every side that choosing one for yourself feels nearly impossible. But this fluidity is also your secret weapon. When life shifts, whether it's a new career, a different city, or a broken relationship, you adapt in ways that catch everyone else off guard. While others are shaken by change, you thrive in it. After all, you were raised inside of it. The bonus baby, raised by the evolutionary village. The bonus baby, born 6 or more years after the rest. Most children get 2 parents. You effectively got 5. You landed inside a structure that evolution spent millennia perfecting, the multi-caregiver system. You had older siblings who had already mapped every social landmine, and parents who had already made and corrected their most critical mistakes. Anthropologists have found a consistent truth across history. Children raised by more than 2 caregivers survived at significantly higher rates. This is what researchers call cooperative breeding, and it is one of the primary reasons humans outlasted every other primate on Earth. More invested adults meant more protection, a denser transfer of knowledge, and more eyes watching for threats. Your siblings already knew which parent to approach, which topics were off limits, and which moods signaled it was time to disappear. You inherited that strategic intelligence for free. While others ran the trials, you simply absorbed the data. But this advantage comes with a specific cost: the feeling of being a different generation within your own DNA. Family holidays can feel like walking into a movie that's already half over. Even at 27, people might still treat you like the baby of the house. However, because you spent your formative years as the youngest person in every room, you forced yourself to hold your own against people who were older, louder, and more experienced. You developed a level of social fluency far beyond your peers, a massive head start that most people don't even realize they're missing. The 2-child family, the duel, and the mirror. The 2-child household is a relentless arena with no place to hide. In a house with exactly 1 sibling, everything becomes a competition. There is no crowd to disappear into, no buffer to soften the friction. You were either the one setting the pace or the one chasing it, and both roles forge skills that no other birth order can replicate. For the vast majority of human history, a sibling was your first ally and your first rival. In small tribal units, the way you managed your sibling predicted how you would handle the rest of the world. The mechanics of survival were practiced in the living room before they were ever used in the wild. In a 2-kid family, the intensity is concentrated. There is just you and one other person who knows every version of your failures and isn't afraid to use that knowledge. If you were the older one, you were handed the weight of responsibility without ever asking for it. Having a younger sibling watch your every move creates a specific, persistent pressure that an only child never feels. If you were the younger one, you were given a live case study of life, walking 1 step ahead of you. You skipped entire layers of failure because someone else paid the price for those mistakes first. Both positions share a unique form of rivalry. One close enough to push you to your limits, but small enough that you truly know your opponent. This builds a specific brand of resilience that only children never develop, and that kids in massive families rarely experience so directly. The struggle is the legacy. The older sibling often finds it impossible to let go of control, while the younger one often struggles to finally pick up the mantle of responsibility. Both are running psychological scripts written before they were 10 years old. You can rewrite those scripts, but only after you finally see the pattern for what it is. The youngest child, the architect of influence. The youngest child is born to move people. By the time you arrived, the parenting experiment had already been run. The rule book was shorter, and the frantic anxiety that shaped your older siblings had been replaced by a seasoned calm. In early human tribes, the elders carried the experience and the middle children kept the peace. But every group reached a breaking point where the old ways failed. Every tribe needed someone willing to gamble on a new path when the current plan hit a dead end. Historically, that role fell to the youngest. They had the least to lose and the most distance from the status quo. Modern research backs this evolutionary tilt. Lastborns are overrepresented in comedy, acting, and the creative arts. They consistently score higher on risk-taking and openness, challenging existing systems more aggressively than any other group. Because you couldn't rely on physical size or seniority to get your way, you had to master the arts of charm and persuasion. You learned how to make people want to say yes before you could even tie your shoes. This is perhaps the most potent social currency in existence, the ability to influence without needing a title. However, your struggle is one of gravity. Because structure wasn't forced upon you, building internal discipline takes deliberate, often painful effort. You may find that gaining credibility takes longer than it should, even when your talent is obvious. But in a world that runs on connection, your ability to make people feel something is your greatest asset. You are built to take the risks that make others freeze. Ultimately, your birth order wasn't just a household dynamic, it was a survival role. The firstborn guarded the camp, the middle child held the group together, the youngest ventured into the unknown. The only child maximized every resource, and the twins mastered the power of the pair. These roles built the neurological patterns that are running in your brain right now. Every position gave you a superpower. Every position handed you a bill. The people who understand their starting point are the only ones who truly get to choose their destination. Lean into what comes naturally, but name the patterns that have been quietly slowing you down. Your birth order shaped you, but it does not own you. That realization is the only thing separating those who are trapped by their past from those who finally use it.